I'm so excited, Cotton!
I'm happy for you, but why is that?
I heard they added a new subspecies of my favorite monster!
Oh?
Uth Duna Gameth!
No, Uth Duna Gamma. Gamma, like the Greek letter gamma.
Oh.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, it's been a few days since the start of the Flame Fate Festival in Monster Hunter Wilds, but a big part of this edition was Arch-Tempered Uth Duna. And today it's time to talk about exactly how her equipment is changing up the meta offensive builds for pretty much every single weapon in one way or another. We've talked about the armor set a little bit on the channel already in a more general sense, how the armor is as individual pieces, and a bit more in-depth on the set bonus as well, but today is about the much larger, yet more specific questions, which is how does the Uth Duna Gamma armor set shake up the top offensive meta sets for each weapon, if at all? The good news as we start up is that it actually is being used. This isn't like a 5-second video just to tell you that the armor is bad. No, because not only is it seeing use in meta builds by nearly every weapon, it's also basically created some new endgame meta setups that simply did not make sense to use beforehand. So let's break it all down. I won't dive into the full build for every individual weapon or anything like that. We generally have our own specific build guides as their own videos for weapons that we play extensively, and there are plenty of great creators out there for the other weapons as well. But this is just to give you the sort of general roundup of what is going on as a whole. For the majority of weapons before this new armor set was added, the best armor set, if we are ranking by effective raw, which is the best measurement of damage potential for a build, was 3 pieces of Arch-Tempered Ray Dow armor, the Ray Dow Gamma set, mostly because the group bonus Lord Soul is an absolutely massive increase for a set bonus, and the skills on the set are pretty solid as well, which makes it even better. Then mixing in either 2 pieces of Gore Magala armor for the 2 set bonus, or some weapons preferred running a Lagiacrus armor piece or even 2 Lagiacrus armor pieces in the non-Ray Dow slots. But the exact setup of course depended on skill requirements for each weapon. They were a little bit different each way. Now that has pretty much been just entirely taken over though, as for the majority of weapons you will now be using the exact same 5 pieces of armor together. This being Ray Dow Gamma helmet and gloves, Lagiacrus chest and waist, and then Uth Duna Gamma pants. What this does specifically is give us a lovely combination that we've just not been able to do at any point, which is having the Lord Soul group bonus, which is a 5% weapon attack increase all by itself, but then pair that with full weakness exploit as a skill, full maximum might as a skill, and also full agitator, which are essentially the holy trinity of offensive skills in Monster Hunter Wilds so far in its lifespan for any weapon that can benefit properly from affinity, meaning every weapon that isn't Hunting Horn, which actually still tends to lean towards these skills anyways, and Gunlance, which does actually have its own unique setup that we will be talking about later. That said, if we are talking about pure EFR, effective raw, the setup goes one step further, because instead of going for 5 agitator, which is achieved using the agitator charm within this talisman, you could instead take 3 ranks of latent power from the latent power charm, bringing down to 3 agitator and 3 latent power. Technically speaking, that is actually higher effective raw because 3 ranks of latent power is more valuable than the last 2 ranks of agitator. However, a lot of people don't like running latent power, so this is just an option. This is a version that is technically better, but it depends on quest timers, which are very variable with the way that latent power scales. That said, if you were to use this latent power version, that means that the agitator actual decorations that you have in are slightly less important, which means for any weapon that actually benefits significantly from 1 rank at burst, you could then do this, which is 3 latent power, 2 agitator, and 1 burst. That 1 rank at burst being extremely good for any weapon that consistently attacks more than once every few seconds, honestly. The set also has tons of customization space for each weapon. It gets 3 counterstrike as a skill just purely from decoration, so that's 3 2 slots, and if you don't use a weapon that specifically benefits from counterstrike, or if you just don't like using counterstrike yourself as a player, you can instead swap those slots out for something like finishing stamina surge, and then 2 ranks of earplugs, which makes you immune to all but 4 monster roars in the entire game. And people often underestimate the value of earplugs when you can get it easily in an otherwise incredible offensive set. You can also use it for some evade window maybe, on a weapon with a bit more reliance on evades if you wanted to as well. The point being that you have the space to make those choices for yourself. The armor itself is so good and it has so many good slots in it that it has actual customization and actual flexibility. Then there are also 4 1-slot sockets in this as well to make it even more customizable. That could be stamina management if you want higher maximum might uptime, or it could be full ranks of Divine Blessing with a shockproof jewel for multiplayer. The point is that this specific grouping of 5 armor pieces gives you an absolute buttload of flexibility with your skills while giving you a set of core skills that are extremely valuable for pretty much every weapon. And that is why this is very, very quickly becoming just sort of the general, non-elementally focused meta set. This isn't to say that you can't use an elemental weapon with it, of course, but if you are specifically choosing element as your main purpose of a build, you would obviously want the skills that actually boost that. That said, while this set applies as an extremely strong general purpose meta set for pretty much every weapon, there are a few exceptions or caveats to this to note. First, Hammer as a weapon doesn't get great use out of maximum might without Fulgur Anjanath 2-set bonus, but we are at a point in the actual life cycle of the game where the higher tier armor has so many powerful skills on it that even with maximum might being on at low uptime for Hammer, this set of armor where you are guaranteed maximum might is worth more than using one of the old Fulgur Anjanath mix sets at this point. Armor has simply power crept so hard that Fulgur Anjanath is just not even close to meta armor for the weapon that most benefited from it beforehand. As well, I mentioned Hunting Horn earlier as a weapon known for having a bunch of attacks that don't benefit from affinity, and while that is true, this set still fully applies to them too. They generally value weakness exploit a little bit less than Agitator though, so what I'd recommend doing for Hunting Horn is to swap out the 2 Tenderizer jewels to instead be Agitator jewels, therefore you have more ranks of Agitator and less of weakness exploit, and this would mean that any flexibility within the build would be raced around using a weakness exploit charm or a latent power charm. What this would do is mean that you have less concerns of affinity to worry about, and you have a lot more consistent raw attack because we're keeping the Agitator instead of keeping the weakness exploit. Or honestly, you could even replace the charm with something that leans even more into full attack by doing something like the Adrenaline Rush Talisman, which is now 3 ranks since Seregios was added to the game, and 3 ranks of Adrenaline Rush is actually extremely good use of your charm here for any weapon that actually does benefit from Adrenaline Rush, meaning weapons that actually do evade through attacks frequently, so stuff that doesn't guard, stuff that doesn't have hyper armor, or just generally ignore attacks, and of course extra bonus points for that for something like Dual Blades and Bow, which have their own unique special evades that we can work with as well. Then we come to the Gunlance, the sort of special child in the room here. Other weapons like bowguns as well could use a set like this one, as they don't work great with maximum might, and so you might get a little bit more mileage out of this, but it definitely is quite a funky one that is built with Gunlance specifically in mind. And I want to shout out Cowslayer, an amazing Gunlance creator, for coming up with this build combo that is honestly quite cool in how it functions. The main idea is because Gunlance gets lesser value from affinity due to shelling, not being able to crit, and a good portion of Gunlance damage coming from shelling, it instead benefits that weapon more to lean into raw attack over things like weakness exploit, which is a lot of affinity, and that doesn't help shelling at all. Whereas the other weapons really do want weakness exploit. Before this update, the general use Gunlance set that I saw going around was 3 pieces of Raidao Gamma armor with a couple pieces of Jin dahaad of all things, but now that is clearly beat out by this fully new build, assuming that the uptime on peak performance is solid. That said, this new setup is arkveld helmet, Uth Duna Gamma chest, gloves, and waist, and then arkveld legs as well. Check out Cowslayer's channel for the full build if you want it, but for a just general gist of what the purpose of this is, you have 3 pieces of Uth Duna Gamma armor giving you the Lord's Soul bonus, which is incredibly important for attack scaling, but this also gives you an efficient source of ranks of the peak performance skill. In most situations, peak performance is not a great skill, however, because Gunlance gets less benefit from affinity, peak performance has higher value than most other weapons because it is an attack skill. Gunlance is not an evasion-friendly weapon, which means Adrenaline Rush in like a Seregios-based set is very awkward to play with, but it is also a guarding weapon, which means that you will be taking chip damage, which sort of deactivates peak performance. That's why you are using 2 pieces of arkveld armor, because the 2-piece set bonus is actually frequent bumps of healing as you're attacking the monster, so as long as you are playing semi-carefully, this should be enough healing to outdo most of the damage intake you will get from guarding from actual chip damage. This lets you keep peak performance active pretty consistently, and the set ends up being about 5% lower overall effective raw than the previous best Gunlance set from my own personal calculations at least, but around 6.5% higher on the raw attack values if you're not counting in affinity. This means, for shelling specifically, it's actually stronger. So you lose a bunch of affinity from the old best set, which weakens your weapon attack specifically, but your shelling gets notably stronger, making up the difference, and a little bit more so. So it is a trade-off that a lot of Gunlance players would be willing to make, but again, that hinges on peak performance uptime being high. Against any monster that you can consistently hit, you can make this be active pretty consistently, but against things like arch-tempered monsters where their actual chip damage is quite high, where you'll have to be blocking a lot of attacks for every attack that you actually get to put out yourself, it is still quite possibly better to use the old build. But this is now a competitor, and that is worth talking about. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A proper roundup of how the Uth Duna Gamma armor set is impacting the meta for each and every weapon in the game, and for a lot of weapons it has created a sort of homogenized singular best grouping of 5 armor pieces that replaces their old best meta sets, with a couple of caveats or exceptions within the group as well. But more than anything, it's incredible how big of a splash Uth Duna has made, pun intended. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.